Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first in a series of STEM Pathways conversations. We are so pleased to have Dr. Bernard Harris joining us today for this conversation. And these STEM Pathways conversations are hosted by the National Math and Science Initiative. My name is Nicole Oshin, the Director of Marketing Communications for the National Math and Science Initiative. And thank you, Dr. Harris, for your time today.
I'm glad to be here this morning.
I'm going to give the audience a little glimpse of your bio, and then we will proceed with our questions.
Great.
So Dr. Harris earned his Doctorate of Medicine from Texas Tech University School of Medicine. He then completed a residency in internal medicine at the Mayo Clinic, a National Research Council fellowship in endocrinology at NASA Ames Research Center, and a flight surgeon training at the Aerospace School of Medicine at Brooks Air Force Base. Dr. Harris was accepted in the NASA Astronaut Corps in 1990 and completed space flight missions in 1993 and 1995. While at NASA, Dr. Harris conducted research in musculoskeletal physiology and clinical investigations of space adaptation and developed in-flight medical devices to extend astronauts' stays in space, which I'm sure the Kelly brothers appreciated that. On February 9th, 1995, Dr. Harris became the first Black man to complete a spacewalk for NASA. And Dr. Harris celebrated the 25th anniversary of that spacewalk just this week. He was also the first astronaut to insert an intravenous line and complete a physical for a fellow crew member. After leaving NASA, Dr. Harris founded the Harris Institute and Foundation, which supports STEM enrichment programs for underserved students around the country. He also became a managing partner of Versalius Ventures, a medtech investment firm. Dr. Harris is the founding board member for the National Math and Science Initiative, a nonprofit that works with school and local systems nationwide to expand access and achievements, in STEM education for all students. So once again, thank you, Dr. Harris, for joining us.
My pleasure. I was surprised that you picked that little nugget up about the intravenous line in space. That's not normally on my bio.
I think that's going to become more and more important as we continue our space exploration. So great achievement. That's awesome. All right. So for our audience, if you could, Dr. Harris, if you could please share sort of your origin story. As a youth, what did you really enjoy about STEM? What gave you the inspiration that eventually led you to your STEM work?
Well, I have to start off and say that I'm a product of an educator. My mother was an educator for over 40 years. And so, it's easy and not easy to grow up in a household like that because there's constant expectations around. For example, in our household, it was not when you were going to graduate high school, it's when you were going to finish college, right? Didn't care what you majored in, just, when are you going to finish college? So that expectation of high school was just given. But my love for STEM started in school, but was really catalyzed by my love for space. And so I was one of those kids who was fascinated in looking at the heavens and wondering what those stars were they other planets or suns, and if they were planets, what it would be like to actually walk on the surface of those things. And then being an old guy like I am, I actually got to see the first human beings land on the moon when I was 13 years old, and that just set it for me. And so that ambition, that dream of going into space led me to an educational path, right? That took me to medical school, as you just told the audience. And eventually being a researcher at NASA, again, all STEM related. And then eventually my first and second flights into space.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So tell me a little bit about what led you to the work at NMSI and what type of work NMSI is doing to impact STEM in underserved communities.
So my work in STEM is really a passion, and it's a passion that goes all the way back to when I was 6 years old, growing up in inner city Houston, um, with a family, my mother and father struggling, internally and financially, which eventually led to their divorce, and I should back up. During this period of time, we were living in a very poor area, and so we were, like I will say, if my mom, if she was still living, I wouldn't say that we were poor, but we were modest and we struggled a little bit. But certainly after the divorce, she was a single mother for 3 kids for a long time. So it's a background that's very common, unfortunately, in Black and Brown communities. And I went through that. And that was probably for me the thing that drove me to education, along with that mother who said that education was the way out. And so that led me to really have that lens as I went through my various careers to eventually say, you know what, if I can come from that background and do the things that I have done, what can I do to enable others to do the same thing? And so that's why I'm involved in the STEM work, because I really feel like STEM education can be that catalyst for others. It's that way up and that way out for individuals and also for communities.
That's great. That's great. This is a little bit different question. What do you feel? Why do you feel it's important for teachers to be supported when we talk about extending access to students in STEM?
Well, you just heard my story. I don't even think I have to answer that, but I will. Just to emphasize the point that, in addition to parents that are out there, the teachers are the next best thing in
Mhm.
terms of supporting our students and enabling them to accomplish their dreams, no matter what their dreams are. If you look back and use this, and look, all of us look back, and we look back at our education, our upbringing, particularly teachers, and why we're in the profession or doing the things that we're done. I'd be willing to bet that there was an educator, there was a teacher that took us under our wings, at least for me. It
Mhm.
happened in elementary school and middle school and high school and in college and medical school and in astronaut school. Right? That someone who took interest in you to ensure that you had what you needed, the skill set that you needed in order to move forward.
Mhm.
Teachers play a critical role in that. And when I think about all the professions, even the ones that I have been involved in, to me, it is the primary profession that enables the rest.
Right.
And so it's important. And so our work at the National Math and Science Initiative is to make sure that teachers, educators, administrators have what they need in order to be more effective in that role.
Right. Right. And this is such a critical time for educators as they have really had to shift, how they're delivering lessons, how they're delivering learning, being online and having to deal with the pandemic during this time. How has the work at NIMSI been affected by this pandemic? What kinds of changes have the programs gone through, both for teachers and for students, with regards to this pandemic and this new way of learning?
Yeah, we had to do like many other organizations, whether you were in education or not, you had to do that pivot. You had to move from what we were doing, which was mostly face-to-face training of our teachers, of our administrators, and our students, for that matter, to then switch to online. And I was very blessed to have a professional group of educators, former educators, and administrators as part of the National Math and Science Initiative that even before March, when we had to make this pivot, we had already seen how technology could be utilized to do our job more effectively. So we were already sort of down that path, but we were, in our strategic plan, it was going to be 2 to 3 years from now, not a month from now. And so we had to make that pivot very, very quickly, and we successfully did that and ended up with some of the largest trainings during our summer series, is what we call it, where we bring in educators from all over the nation for our programming. But this time, instead of face-to-face and regionally done, we had to do it online. And so that did change our work. One of the things I think as an organization that we were always also challenged by was having the technology infrastructure to do that.
Mhm.
And so we have managed to put that in place now. And so COVID has been a blessing and a curse. A curse that, man, we have to change the way in which we do business, but a blessing in that we had to change the way in which we do business, which I think allows us to more effectively deliver our program, and the ability to do that to more educators, more administrators, and more students.
That's great. Now, we talk a lot about at NMSI how we serve underserved communities. And a lot of times people think about that as as urban communities. But let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we help to mitigate in rural communities, some of the communities that may not have some of the internet access and some of the teacher resources. How does NMSI actually work with those organizations or those school systems?
We have part of our goal and part of our mission is to reach those students further from opportunity. And when you try to define that, you ask people, what does that mean? Typically, you say, well, it's the inner city. It's those underprivileged kids, economically disadvantaged areas around this country. And we forget that there is this whole segment of the U.S. population that has the same issues as our in the urban setting. And so we have made a conscious effort to go after those students. And we have a number of programs around the country focused in rural areas. We have a large program in rural Pennsylvania, one in North Dakota, Wyoming. We're looking at in New Mexico and Arizona, looking at those areas. And even in the state of Texas, the great state of Texas, we're also in West Texas, which are traditionally rural with our programming. We are also fortunate enough for folks to recognize our work. And so we're getting support from the Department of Education to provide some of that, some of those funds, so that we can, increase our rural access.
That's great. That's wonderful. So, our audience today, we're hoping, is some young STEM professionals who may be young in their careers, and they may be thinking about what they can do to really help their communities in learning more about STEM education, STEM careers, STEM opportunities. What would be some advice that you would give to a young STEM professional on how they can get involved in this type of work and how they can continue to work to expand access to STEM education in their communities?
Yeah. So if you're already in the STEM field and in some profession, and you have developed a level of expertise, no matter what that is, there is an opportunity for you to share that experience with others that may not have the opportunity to know what you do. one of the things that I think is important in our community, especially the Black and Brown communities out there, is to not only push education, but also experience, and more importantly, exposure to things, right? So if I'm in, a typical inner city community, the role models, the stereotypes that I see uh, do not reflect the professionals who are also look like us that are involved. And so I think just getting out front and showing yourself either as a sponsor or as a mentor, um, taking the opportunity to go in the schools so that kids can see you. You know, I can't tell you how many times when I've gone and done a visit as an astronaut, and I walk in with my flight suit, and the kids are just amazed to see a Black astronaut, and they'll go, "I didn't know we had Black astronauts." So in the 21st century, when we have all the things that we're doing in space, we have technology all around us. For a young kid to say that they didn't know that we had Black astronauts, or that we had female astronauts, or Hispanic astronauts, Latino astronauts in space, it's kind of like, where have you been? Well, it's not their fault. They have just not been exposed, right? They're in an environment where that is not priority, or there is not an opportunity to do that. So as a STEM professional, I think it is our obligation to show ourselves, to show up. And that is the first step. And then the second step is then, relaying what you do, and then figuring out how you can take your skill set, whether it is the fact that you're a chemist or an engineer, but how do you translate that into action within whatever community that you're doing? I know I'm going on and on here, but you touched a button with me. Even though the National Math and Science Initiative and many organizations that are doing good work around the country, we're doing our part. We're only reaching a fraction of the population that needs help here. And the only way that you can expand that is to collectively work together and also contribute in the way that you can. So if everybody had the mindset to give back, it's some modicum of effort. Just think, how different position we would be in this country. So I think it's incumbent of all of us to figure out what is that thing that I am going to do to help the person behind me. It's paying it forward.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many ways to do that. In today's environment, I have a friend who's a veterinarian, and he has an extremely active Instagram page where he's always showing operations that he's performing on different animals and taking care of pets. And so he really has a large following of young people who are interested in veterinary school. So even in the pandemic, there are ways that if you're a young STEM professional, you can build an audience and you can share the types of things that you are doing in your profession.
And using this device, get it out of the is a way, and young people, since we are talking about young professionals here, you guys know how to use these devices in ways that I could only dream of, or maybe not even dream of. Which will allow you to have access and influence, and use that to have positive influence on those communities that you want.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. So we may also have some audience members who have families, who have students who are potentially interested in STEM careers. What are some ways in which families can engage their students and expose them to different STEM careers and STEM opportunities?
Yeah, so I think that the key is being open to create an environment that allows the child or the person to ask questions, and then being willing, even though you may not know the answers, to work with that child, that person, to find those answers. So I remember, I'll use this example. Let me go back to my mother again. I remember when I was probably, I don't know, 35 or so, my mother had her first grandchild. And then a few years later, she was taking this grandchild to SeaWorld.
Yeah.
And at 35 years old, I looked at my mom. I said, "Mom," I said, "why are you taking them? You've never taken me to SeaWorld." First of all, you didn't have SeaWorld back 40 years ago or whatever it was. But the point was, you're spending all this time taking this my niece to SeaWorld, and she reminded me, I did the same thing for you. I took you to the circus. I took you to the museum. You know, we grew up on the Navajo Indian Reservation. She took us to the Grand Canyon. We had all of these different experiences that just instilled in me this love for knowledge. So it's about that. But I didn't remember it. And the point I'm trying to make here is that it's never too early to start exposing young people to these opportunities for them to learn, even if they don't remember them. It still instills in them this love for knowledge, and I think it's the reason why I got a chance to do all the things that I've done. It started with that, and then I built on that. She then built on that, and then at some point in time, I was in the mode for learning, and I continued it on my own. But it wouldn't have happened unless I had help, unless I had that support from my mother and my family during those early times.
Wow.
That's easy to do.
Yes.
That's free. There are a lot of opportunities out there to do that. Sometimes we forget that. We
Mhm.
think that we have to pay for those things, and we don't.
Right.
Again, I go back to it's about experience and exposure
Right.
that opens the door for people to explore, who they are and what they can become.
That's so true. That's so true. And just a little bit of a plug for the National Math and Science Initiative. We do sponsor Family STEM Adventure Days on the weekends, on Saturdays. So that is a program that is free to families. And we have a variety of activities that you can log on just with your computer, and you can enjoy those activities with your children, and their children of all ages. So once again, another nod to exposure that you can take advantage of in order to continue your child's interest in STEM and STEM based careers. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk to the audience about any other topics around STEM education, around education in general, any other calls to action that you have from your perspective and your vast history. What other advice or what other things would you like to say to our audience as we wrap up our session today?
So I understand that we have a lot of young professionals or young people who are either interested in education or maybe just keen to find out and learn more about me. Uh, I want to say this whenever I have an opportunity to talk to groups, whether they're young groups or old groups. I think it's important for you to figure out who you are. I have this thing that I do in major audiences talking about is three things I know about you, and that is number one, that we are born multi-potential with the ability to do anything that we want to do, and number two, that we're born multi-talented, and that we have to figure out and spend time figuring out who we are and what those talents are that enable the third piece is that I believe that all of us are born for a reason. There are things that we are supposed to do while we're here on this earth. And the most important part about that is knowing who you are, knowing those skills, knowing those talents to figure out, where your gaps are and where you need to enhance your skill sets, and where you then that essentially sets the foundation for discovering what you might want to do next. And I'm convinced that if you look to those things that you are drawn to, right, whether you see it on television, on the internet, or you bump into it through, meeting or acquaintance or, whatever, and you like it, you probably ought to go down that avenue. You could go down that avenue and start exploring it. It'll eventually lead you to the profession that you want to go in. So that's probably number one. Number two is when you think about where this country is going, STEM education, STEM knowledge is going to be so critical because it's involved in everything that we do. And I always say that if you doubt that, then go to your local mechanic, and you'll realize that they use technology to diagnose what's wrong with your car, right? And so, but it applies to everything. So having that knowledge is not wasted. So it's really important. And then that then translates into careers. What you'll eventually do, and STEM fields are the highest paying jobs. So if you want, if you're driven by economics, well, STEM education should drive you, to those high paying jobs, and realize that how important that is. And then the last thing I'll say is just think about, if we're able to lift up all of our communities, if we're able to, particularly the Black and Brown community, which is at the forefront of what we're talking about these days, if we're able to instill STEM education in those communities, just think about the impact that could have. It's like the old adage that teach a person to fish, right? Don't give them a fish. So to me, the STEM education, and the reason why the National Math and Science Initiative exists, the reason why I'm involved in it, and this is my personal mission and ministry, is to ensure that we are teaching our communities how to fish so that they are self-sustaining and, more importantly, growing. And what does that translate into? Not only advancement in our communities, but advancement of this nation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bernard Harris, CEO of the National Math and Science Initiative. We really appreciate your time and your insights today on our STEM Pathways conversations. For our audience, please join us for our next conversation, which will take place on Monday, February the 15th at 11:30 a.m. And we will hear from Dr. Frederick Bertley from the Center for Science and Industry. We sincerely hope you join us. And thank you again, Dr. Harris.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.